Welcome to another edition of Are You a Robot? This is a series where we aim to tackle some of the greatest ethical issues around AI and related technologies. The way that we're doing this is we're gathering the best and brightest minds in their fields to come and talk to us, or to come and talk to me, really, about what it is that they're doing and how they see things moving forward when it comes to AI ethics and AI governance. We're trying to stimulate this conversation so we as a community can find some best practices that we can all agree on and move forward with. I don't want this to end right here, though. I would love for you to come and join us in Slack, because we have a Slack community where we are continuing these conversations. So come, stop by, say hi, let us know what you're passionate about, let us know what you're working on, drop your 2 cents on what it is that you like or don't like when it comes to AI ethics or AI governance. And let's create this framework, let's create these best practices together. Last thing I will mention is that we have a sponsor. None of this would be possible without Ethics Grade. They're an ESG benchmarking firm that specializes in technological governance. Big shout out to them and a big thank you. Let's talk about our chat with the Curtis sisters. This is an incredible story because I was originally supposed to just interview Anna, but she called me up about a week before we were supposed to have the interview, and she said, my sister is doing a lot of research when it comes to shady activity within blockchain. And maybe she would be a good person to have on with me so she can share some of these stories that she's been finding out about. And of course, I was all for it. And so now we have two for the price of one today. We get Hannah and her sister Priscilla to come and talk to us about blockchain. They give a lot of information about these shady marketplaces. They also talk to us about what her company is doing, Chainalysis, and why there's a need for a company like hers to exist. And then we get a tour of Tor at the end of this. So if you have never seen what the black market or the dark web looks like, then you might want to watch this on YouTube, because she shows us around and gives us a quick run through of the browser Tor and what you can find on there. And it's a little bit different than I expected, to be honest. All right, without further ado, let's just get into it with Hannah and Priscilla.
Are you a robot?
I think we can start with me just asking a bit of background on both of you. I know we have the luxury of having both of you on today. It was supposed to just be Hannah, but then we found out Priscilla also is in the field of figuring out what's going on in the dark web, and also learning about companies and screw ups. And I know you have some stories that you can get into in a bit, Priscilla, but before we get into anything, I think it would be really nice to hear both of your backgrounds and how you came to be where you are.
Okay. So thanks for having us. We're excited to chat with you. My background is in basically data analysis for a lot of different companies. So it wasn't really specifically blockchain or cryptocurrency until I joined Chainalysis recently. Before that, I was working at healthcare companies and utilities companies and other random places, some healthcare, I think I said, where they basically had all of their data in a bunch of different systems and databases that didn't talk to each other, but they needed to pull it all together to be able to make informed decisions. And so they would hire me and my colleagues to come in and bring all that data together and help non-techie people use it. And then I was fascinated with blockchain just personally and kind of got into it. And then when I found Chainalysis, I was like, oh, that's exactly what I wanted to do. So I joined the company.
Perfect. And we'll get into what Chainalysis is doing in a bit. But Priscilla, how'd you wind up here doing stuff with Chainalysis?
Yeah, that's funny. So I'm Hannah's sister, and I'm a professional actor and dancer, and I'm a fitness instructor. And so when the pandemic hit, all my modes for, all my industries disappeared really in like a day. And so Hannah and I were talking once, and she talked about how one of their freelancers had quit and all this, what the job was. And I've always loved research. I always have loved things like that. And so she was like, actually, I think you would have a lot of fun with this. So I was like, great, well, let's do a trial. Let's see. And then I did it for about a week, and I was like, this is super fun. This is really cool.
Yeah. And just break down for us, what exactly are you doing?
So basically, because there are so many cryptocurrency companies and exchanges, and there's just a ton. And some of it's legitimate and some of it's not, and some of it's kind of in the middle. And so essentially, I just go through, they give me a list of specific things, or I'll just go through this just master list of a ton of them. And I find out their legal information, their this, their that, look up article, just kind of everything, just to give a sense of all this stuff. I always say, like, Wikipedia, when there's that panel on the side of like when somebody died and where they were born and all that kind of stuff, I am finding that panel for cryptocurrency companies.
It's like the too long didn't read section.
Right.
Yeah.
So then, can you break down, Hannah, just what exactly is Chainalysis? Am I pronouncing it correctly? Chainalysis.
Yeah.
What are they doing?
So with cryptocurrency like Bitcoin and Ethereum, and there are a lot at this point, it's a digital currency that people can use what's called pseudo-anonymously. So that means that you're basically anonymous, but not quite. And so it's a public blockchain, which means that anybody can tap into that data and kind of see these transactions going back and forth. But where you might look at your transactions in your bank statement and see, you're on one side of the transaction and then your coffee shop is on the other side of the transaction. On the blockchain, it just looks like one side is a random string of numbers and letters, and the other side is a random string of numbers and letters. If you do some analysis, though, you can actually figure out what's on both sides of those transactions. And we're not interested in like knowing individuals and what individuals are doing necessarily, but more companies. So it might be that funds coming out of an exchange where somebody swapped their dollars for Bitcoin then are going into a darknet market where that person is now buying drugs, or maybe funds stolen from some exchange are then routed through some mixers to hide what's happening, or try to hide the funds, and then ultimately get cashed out into a fiat currency like dollars or pounds or euros. And so that flow of funds kind of requires, it's all available to see on this public blockchain, but it takes some kind of analytics applied on top of it to see how that's going. So
basically you're showing those analytics, and you're able to see where the flow of funds is actually moving.
That's
and
right.
So yeah, that's great. I guess not so much for the people who want to stay anonymous,
Right.
But I know that the first time I think I heard about blockchain or Bitcoin, because I think everyone first hears about Bitcoin and then moves on to the next ones. And I think it was in like 2012 maybe. And you still, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you still had to use Tor to actually be able to access it, or you needed like a specific piece of hardware to access it. Am I completely making this up? Do you know anything about that, the history?
So Bitcoin has always, it's programmatic. So you can facilitate transactions with, as long as, if you know how to write the code, you could do it yourself, or or use a service that provides those transactions, like a wallet software, something like that. And so basically what you have is you'll have a private key and your public key, your public address, where if you wanted me to send you Bitcoin, you would give me your public address, and then I would conduct that transaction, like send my Bitcoin to your address. And you could store your private key to be able to access those funds on what's it called? A paper wallet, which is really, you just write it down. Or you could use a wallet software, or you could actually not control your private keys at all. And you could use a service that essentially holds the Bitcoin for you and then access it that way. So you don't actually have to use like Tor or a special hardware or software. There's kind of a variety of options.
Okay, so then where does Tor fit into all this?
Yeah, Tor. So Tor is the Onion router. It's an anonymous kind of relay so that you can browse the internet without people tracking your movements and knowing your location and what you're searching for. So it's basically kind of like a sister technology to Bitcoin, where both are for anonymity. One is for anonymity in your kind of information and actions online, and the other is for anonymity in your purchases. And they are typically thought of together or used together, because if you use Tor to buy drugs, then if you just use your bank account, that kind of kills the anonymity. So you would use Bitcoin to keep yourself, private.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. So, and I think we had mentioned, you said that we may be able to get a little tour of Tor later on.
Sure.
Because I've only seen it briefly in 2012 when my friend showed me. I think that's probably why I associated it with Bitcoin with Tor, was because he showed me this and he said, look, and then, people buy drugs, or that you can get whatever you want on the dark web, and you use this thing called Bitcoin. And so I just want to know, like, all right, there are obvious issues that we face with Bitcoin and with decentralized currencies, but there are a lot of potential benefits. And in your mind, I guess I'll go through, well, we can start with you, Hannah, and say, like, how do you feel about the negative effects of Bitcoin and things like Tor, and then comparing those to the positive side of things that could be how we can leverage it for good?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an important distinction, because just because it's anonymous doesn't mean it's by nature illicit. So there are a lot of legitimate reasons to use both cryptocurrency and Tor. For one, with Tor, things like activism, or people who want to speak out against a government that would otherwise censor their speech, or even just being like kind of protected against advertising and people tracking your every move online. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're a criminal or doing something illicit. And then with cryptocurrency, there's the main thing is actually that it's, I guess, separated from any one specific government currency. And so it's really this global, worldwide currency that that is just run by software, and it's open source, and it's a network of people rather than it being controlled by any specific government. And the interesting thing that I've been learning and watching as I've been in this space is that there's so much regulation around money movement, especially across borders. And one of the things that's traditionally appealing to some people about Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies is kind of like getting around that red tape. But the thing is that red tape is there for a lot of reasons. There are these controls in place to prevent money laundering and to prevent movement of stolen funds, and make sure that if somebody has been frauded out of millions of dollars, that can be kind of tracked and collected. So right now there's this growing infrastructure being built around cryptocurrencies. And basically, even though cryptocurrency can't really be controlled, the businesses that facilitate cryptocurrency transactions can be controlled. And so all the governments in the world right now are grappling with how to balance a cryptocurrency that could be used for banking, for helping people who can't get a bank account use use money on the one hand, and then also making sure that the controls are in place so that you're not just letting these networks of nefarious activity happen. Does that make sense?
Yeah, completely. And as an expat of the US, I know very well about these different red tape or the hoops you have to jump through when you want to get currency from one country to the next. And that is something that I think people are very interested in when they look at Bitcoin or any kind of blockchain that has that. But at the end of the day, like you said, it's there for a reason. And as much as we try to avoid the tax man, they're able to come and find us wherever we are, if we're using Bitcoin or not. So I wanted to jump in, Priscilla, because I've heard you have a lot of cool stories about different things that have happened, like scams or what was another one, like thefts that have happened. Some kind of, was there well, I don't know all of the stories, but I'm sure you can enlighten us to these facts. Can you tell us some of the crazy stuff that you've found as you've been researching?
Yeah, so that's been a really funny and interesting tangent of all of this, is just coming across these wild stories. It almost feels like, you know, how every like cop show and things kind of have a gimmick. I don't, you know, like, now I can't think of any, but you know, most like, you know, Castle, he's a writer, and Psych, he's a psychic detective. You know, there's all these things. And it's like, I don't think we're that far away from the next like cop show gimmick being someone who's like investigates cryptocurrencies. And that's like the only like niche of like crime that they like do in terms of like murder investigations, because there is so much money involved in cryptocurrencies. I mean, millions to billions of dollars. And so, you know, in so many cases, especially like Hannah was saying, sometimes people don't store their, you know, cryptocurrencies offline. They store them online with an exchange. I might be using terminology wrong. Hannah, you can be like, you're saying things wrong. But in which case, when one of these exchanges disappears overnight, and then they have access to all of these funds, and people will just lose millions of dollars, or however much they have in that exchange can just disappear. And then people, you know, don't like that very much, so that they have a tendency to retaliate. So there was one, I was looking it up this morning to try to remember what it was. And it was a Polish exchange, and, you know, disappeared overnight. The exchange did not have, you know, everyone lost their money. And then a few days later, one of the co-founders was like found dead outside of his apartment with like, I think it was like blunt force trauma to the head or something. And it was just like, yeah, don't steal people's money. They don't like it. You know, not that he should have, you know, been shot outside of his apartment. But, and then I think the biggest one, and Hannah will have information on this one too, Quadratics, which was a Canadian exchange, I believe, right?
Riga, Canadian. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And it was a young founder, and he mysteriously died in India on vacation. But so I have a lot of theories on this one, because he died, but 12 days before he died, he had changed his will, and his wife got everything. I mean, multiple houses, cars, yachts. She had 2 little dogs. Both dogs had $100,000 trust fund. I mean, just, you know, millions of dollars, like just.
The dogs had a trust fund?
Yes, both of them. I think they were like little chihuahuas or something. $100,000 trust fund each. And so his will is changed. 12 days later, he like mysteriously dies on vacation in India. So, and only he had access to the cold wallet. So all of the funds within this exchange, he was the sole purpose who had access into that. And so when he died, all that money, no one can get to it.
So it's stuck there.
Presumably, yes. Or he faked his death and is now just living off of this.
That's your theory then.
One of the two, either his wife killed him to get her puppy money, or or he faked his death and ran off with the funds. So.
Wow. Wow. So these exchanges, can you maybe break it down a little bit more for us, Hannah? Because I know they're like, there's the most famous one that I'm sure a lot of us have heard of, which is Coinbase, right? Is that an exchange or is that a wallet?
That's both, actually. They offer both services. So they offer a hosted wallet, which means that they control the keys. Actually, I think they have a different wallet service. It's a hybrid of that, and then also an exchange. And as you said, it's probably the most famous. It's definitely the most beginner friendly. And actually, to that end, and I don't say this to disparage Coinbase at all, but when you see some of these scams that play off of people who don't really know anything about cryptocurrency, so there are scams called romance scams where somebody will pretend to be a lover, develop this relationship and then ask for money to maybe come see the victim or something like that, and they'll ask them to send Bitcoin for the transaction, or there's lots of variations of that. And so you often see that it's actually Coinbase is the one the victim just doesn't know, and they search easy cryptocurrency, buy Bitcoin, whatever, and then so the Coinbase users end up it's just because it's so easy to use that oftentimes you see the victims being from Coinbase. There was also an interesting case, and again, I don't say this to disparage Coinbase at all, but it's just because I think because they are so easy to use, the Hamas organization, if you're familiar with them, did a fundraising campaign about a year ago to raise money, and they decided to use cryptocurrency for the first time. And so they actually just clearly didn't know what they were doing. And so they just created an account on Coinbase and put their address out there for everybody to send them money. And obviously that got shut down real quick. And so then this is actually interesting because one of the things you find is you watch everybody's learning and getting more sophisticated with cryptocurrency, both on the law enforcement side and the criminal side. And this is one of those cases where the first fundraiser, they just created an account on Coinbase under the name of the Al-Qassam Brigades. The second fundraiser, they got a little bit more sophisticated and just put out, a address that was not hosted anywhere, but it was still a reused address. So all of the funds just went straight to this one address. And so that's easier to track. And then the third campaign that they did, it was actually a website that auto-generated a new address every single time. And so then that becomes a little bit harder to track. It's interesting.
Harder, but not impossible, I imagine. Right. Yeah. You're able to crack that code.
Right.
And so it feels to me like it's a bit of a game of cat and mouse on that. And this is very much like when you start getting into the security side of the internet, right? There's the hackers, and then the ones who are trying to protect against that. And you have what are they called? The white hat hackers. Is that right? What it is? Yeah. And so I've heard from a mutual friend that you're more of a white hat hacker. Is that true? Is there any truth to that?
I mean, I think he's being generous. I'm not really a hacker. Yeah. I mean, what we do is definitely on the white hat side of cybercrime, I guess. I mean, it's, you either use your tech skills for good, bad, or neutral. And that's a really vague thing, right? Because you can talk about, there are these websites on Tor that sell stolen credit card information, right? And so these are people who have somehow gotten their hands on a bunch of either PII, personally identifiable information, or credit card numbers and stuff like that, and or maybe passwords and accounts. And those can all just be sold and bought very easily on the dark web. And so obviously that's illicit activity. But then you can also think about people who are using their tech skills for ad tech, and they're kind of just like exploiting people legally by tracking all of their online activity and, figuring out how to target them with advertising and make money off of them. And, that's like, it's not illegal, it's fine. And usually we all kind of benefit from it a little bit too, by just having this targeted advertising that gives us exactly what we want. But it's not, it is a gray area. So if you have tech skills that you apply to a gray area like that, that's not for good or for bad.
Yeah, well, and also I think what the point you're making is interesting too, when you talk about these ad tech people that are helping get more targeted ads to you. It sets up a foundation that could be used in a bad way, right?
Yeah.
And I think we've all seen that, and everybody's eyes are very open right now because of the most recent documentary on Netflix, that everyone's realizing, whoa, what happened? What's going on? I didn't realize it was doing that. And we're all seeing it more and more with as news comes out each day on these giants like Facebook and like Google and YouTube and that stuff. So it is a very fine line, and you make a great point. Like, what is for good? What is for bad? What is just neutral?
Right.
Is there such thing as neutral? So that's very nice. Now, being that you're very much following the money, and if I needed to, how could I launder some money? Is it possible these days? That's what, like, I always think about that, how technologically savvy the banks are, and the like blockchain I looked at as like the oasis where, okay, if you want to launder money, you have to use blockchain.
Right.
But even with blockchain, it sounds to me like you can't really do it.
It's one of my favorite topics to think about. And I think Priscilla and I have chatted about it over beers before too. It's like, if you had to launder money, like, how would you do it? And it is hard. And a lot of, like, you have to be good, and you have to not really make any mistakes. Although I was watching an old John Oliver episode yesterday about churches, and, nothing like the churches that are basically using loopholes in the US tax system to basically, you can just, as long as you just kind of claim to be a religious organization, they don't really scrutinize you. And so that, I was actually thinking about that yesterday. If I were to launder money, I may just like set up a religion and do it that way.
That's the easiest way.
That's probably the easiest way. So one interesting thing on Bitcoin, I think, is actually mining. So part of the infrastructure of Bitcoin is the mining that takes place to generate new Bitcoin. And so technically, these newly minted Bitcoin are clean, right? They're freshly minted. So one good way to launder money, I guess, would be to buy the mining hardware with your dirty funds. So, and pay for the electricity of doing the mining with your dirty funds. And then out comes your clean Bitcoin, and then you cash that out at an exchange. And no one's the wiser.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. And so, but as far as like what we typically think of, money going from one place to the next, to some offshore shell account or some shell corporation, and then to another place, and all circling around, that doesn't work. And is that what you're making sure doesn't work? Like, so that it goes through, it gets exchanged through 20 hands, and then you think it's clean?
So, yeah, so the interesting thing with blockchain is, I think people might think that it's easier than having to go through all of those hoops of, these like shell companies and all that. And you would basically just try to move the money around the blockchain creatively, and have people lose the trail. But you have to be really good to actually have really lose the trail, because there are these services called mixers where you put your funds in and then they give you your funds out with a different address. And so theoretically that's not supposed to be trackable. But if you think of the game Sudoku, where right, there's numbers that you know and numbers that you don't know, and you just kind of apply logic to figure out the ones that you don't know. That's kind of a simplified analogy of some of the ways that you can figure out mixing funds. There are other things on the blockchain too, but actually, yeah. So I mean, I think that probably the old-fashioned ways of money laundering may be better than with cryptocurrency because it's so trackable. Even people will do chain hopping, so they'll use a swap service to change their Bitcoin to Ether or some of the currency.
That was what I was going to ask.
So that does make it harder to track, but it's still all this kind of visible digital trail. So actually, Priscilla found some interesting stuff. The companies that have looks like different services, but they're probably all really the same service.
Yeah. So I came across. I was going through this list of high-risk exchanges, and I realized, and a lot of what I go through is reading over legal documents and things like that. And I realized I was like, oh, this feels redundant. I feel like I'm doing the same thing over and over and over again. And then I realized, wait, I literally feel like I'm doing the same thing over and over and over again. So then I went back through and I realized that all of these different exchanges were essentially the exact same thing. I mean, almost verbatim, copy and pasted legal documents. The infrastructure looked the same. And so I sent it to Hannah and another guy on her team. And I was like, I don't know if this means anything. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. And they were like, that probably means something. Maybe send us some screenshots. So I went through and I sent them some links and screenshots. And yeah, because I think it was probably all, one entity. And then they just had all these different things with zero regulation and no rules and no, what's called know your customer rule. They didn't apply any of that. So people didn't have to give any information to set up an account. Anyone could set up an account. So there's no way to track who's going through, what the money is, who it's coming from, or anything like that.
And you say high risk exchange. What is a high risk exchange? What constitutes one of those, and why? What's the appeal of a high risk exchange? Is there more potential to make more money, or why would someone want to be in a high risk exchange?
Yeah, so that's funny. Hannah and I actually had just a big conversation about this the other day, because about, if something is labeled as a high risk exchange, you do kind of want to make sure that it really is, because you don't want to label something as bad that isn't, because that's just unfair. They're not doing anything wrong. But then there's the other side of it too, where but just because you label something as high risk doesn't necessarily mean that it is 100% attached to a terrorist organization, or, it also may just mean it's just riskier. So any exchange that they're called KYC, which is know your customer. If an exchange doesn't have a KYC, anyone is using it. Anyone can do it. There's no way for the company to track anything. And so if you want to stay super low key, you can do it, but the less regulated it is, the less information they need from you, it's more likely that something bad may happen, or that you are a bad person using it. A regular exchange, if it's not labeled high risk, it has a strong KYC policy. It's regulated by government organizations. It has these things in place to let people know, if I use this, my funds are probably safe. My information is safe, because some of them, you do have to put your information in, but it's not regulated by any government entity. So you don't know whether or not your information is safe in this exchange or not. So my advice would be, if you are using it, to find one that is as regulated as possible because it's more likely that your information will be safe.
And so the fear of using one of these exchanges that
it's legacy
is that
now
they
at
could be
5
gone
years old.
tomorrow.
Yes. The one thing that is encouraging is that more often than not, the people are found out. And like for me, that just makes me feel good. You know, like even if I lost money, to know that these people are found out is reassuring. It's like, okay, well, you stole from me. That's a bummer. But when you invest, that is a risk in investments always, is that, you know, don't invest more than you're willing to lose because you might lose it. But they're almost always found out. And the cool thing about Hannah and her company is that, you know, it's all still brand new and they already have all these things in place to be able to find people. You know, she's one of that, the Chainalysis is one of like the pioneer companies in this. You know, they've the old one, the one that's been around forever. And Hannah, what is it, like 5 years old, 6 years old? Like,
Yeah.
you know, yeah. So, you know, it's very, I think people should be very encouraged because I do think there's a lot of good things about using cryptocurrencies. And, you know, it's nice to know that, yes, the criminal side of it is advanced, but so is the opposite side. And, you know, even in the few years that it's been around, you know, a lot of the people are found out, a lot of the people are in prison or, you know, on trial right now, or, you know, all kinds of like, so, you know, so I think it's a safe and interesting and worthwhile thing. And I think it's just going to keep growing because I think people see the benefit of it.
Yeah, let's talk a bit about those benefits. And maybe, Hannah, you can give us some reasons why we want to use cryptocurrencies. And also, there's 1 million coins. So, like, what are some interesting ones that you've seen and why? Because I get a little confused sometimes on why you would want to use one over the other and what it's for. And I know there's a huge amount of hype around the coins and just blockchain in general. So, can you break that down for us a little bit, make it more clear as to what the benefits are and why I would want to use this?
Yeah, it's a big topic, but I'll do my best. So the two kind of original and, you know, arguably most popular cryptocurrencies are Bitcoin and Ether, which are actually two different blockchains, two different, you know, software for digital currency. Bitcoin is unique in that it's just a store of value for the most part. So you just use it to, you know, if you have Bitcoin, that's your store of value, and then you can use the software to send Bitcoin to somebody else, and then they have that value. The Ethereum blockchain, of which Ether is one currency, but there are lots of others that are built on top of the blockchain, is different because it could be used as a store of value, and then it can also be used for what are called smart contracts, which is basically code that executes on this blockchain. So you can really build infrastructure around the movement of value that doesn't need a human in the loop. So I'll give an example of what I mean by that, because I know that's kind of an abstract topic. So say I want to buy something from Priscilla, but I don't trust Priscilla, you know, she's shady. So I want to make sure that I get what, you know, I get whatever I'm paying her for before I give her the money, right? So we could build a smart contract that will basically hold the funds kind of locked, not give them to Priscilla yet until kind of we both agree that the transaction has happened as we want it to, and then the funds unlock and she gets them. So these kind of smart contracts can be very simple or they can be really complex. And they're just kind of a set of instructions that are encoded into the blockchain to make sure that certain things happen. And when they do happen, the funds can move, or, you know, what kind of whatever the outcome of that is. Now, the tricky thing is it is up to humans to write the code for it. So have you ever seen software without bugs, right? If you mess something up, then you can end up losing money kind of forever. It's just lost on the blockchain, and there's nothing really you can do about it. And I think maybe the most famous case of this was the DAO, the DAO, which stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization. It was this first kind of test of using smart contracts and code to have like an organization that's completely run just without, without a human. And so people put money into it and backed it. It was on Ethereum. And then somebody exploited an issue in the smart contract where they were basically able to get the funds before they were like logged as spent. So they basically were able to kind of siphon out millions of dollars from the DAO, or millions or billions, I forget. It was a lot of money, but that actually became kind of a philosophical like turning point in the Ethereum blockchain, which led to what's called a hard fork, where half of the people wanted to make a change, reverse that contract, reverse it so that those funds could kind of be given back to the people that it was stolen from. And other people were like, well, that's antithetical to this whole idea. If we start kind of rolling things back, then it's not an immutable blockchain. And so there was a split. And now there's two different blockchains that were originally from the first one. There's Ethereum Classic and then just Ethereum. So that was a really long and complex answer to your question. Sorry.
No, it was perfect. It gives a lot of color around what is going on. And like with these different ones, I know that there was a huge amount of craze, especially maybe not so much anymore, but I want to say like 3 years ago, probably when I bought my first Bitcoin, there was an insane amount of hype around all these ICOs, the initial coin offerings from many different companies, right? And can you just walk us through that and how that works? Because I know there's a lot of people that maybe got really rich from those ICOs, and then you don't see much happening with that, or vice versa. They've been able to do some really cool things and haven't done an ICO. So can you walk us through that craze?
Yeah, so ICO, initial coin offering, is basically a way of crowdfunding projects. So you issue a coin, people buy that coin, and then they hold money in one of those coins. And so by doing that, every person kind of has a stake in this project, which if the project does well, then presumably the value that they hold in that coin is going to go up. And conversely, the project that needed funding has received all of this money for the coin offering. So as you can imagine, with this kind of crowdsourced funding and this craze where people are basically speculating, and they just, they find a project that they think is interesting and they hope it's going to get them rich really quickly. There is a spectrum of quality of these ICOs. So some of them were actually legit projects that, legitimately like could use the funding and use the funding well. And then there's like plethora of just scams, so people put their money in and nothing ever happened with it, and everything in between. And so, I mean, there were some notable ones that raised, EOS is a project, actually. It's its own blockchain, but it did an ICO on Ethereum, raised billions of dollars, and then used that money to build a separate blockchain that exists today. And it's unique because it's supposed to be kind of like a higher throughput, which one of the problems, or one of the issues with Bitcoin and Ethereum is that it takes a while to process transactions. So the kind of like transactions per second processed on that blockchain is relatively low, which means if you get more and more people using it, it becomes slower and slower to process transactions. And so EOS is designed to facilitate a lot more transactions. But it's not, I mean, it's popular, but it's like had some issues. If you Google EOS news, you'll see some of the issues that have been having, especially like kind of like with developers in the community. I think mainly because people are worried that it's too centralized and that kind of control is concentrated in too few nodes, which means it can be controlled.
Yeah, I could see that. Now, I guess that does beg the ethics question of, when I think about the whole blockchain and the dark web and the want or the necessity or just the desire to remain anonymous, I guess I see it as a big pushback from everything that we're going through in the normal web that we look at. And I wonder if you feel that there is ever a good case for remaining anonymous, because I think we've mapped out a lot of these bad cases, the bad actors that you find a lot, and what the majority of people are using the dark web for, right? But I think about different cases like those who are trying to stand up to dictators or organize something around that, and they need to be anonymous. And so I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, it's important. And there are the cases like you just mentioned that are really clear cut. You know, people need this anonymity for their safety. And you know, there are even like support groups for people recovering from like addictions and abuse and that kind of thing. And that's really important. I think we are, as a society, we haven't figured out how to grapple with how transparent and trackable all of our online activity is. You know, before everything was online, people could kind of safely assume that, like, if they're in their house or behind closed doors or whatever, that nobody knows, you know, that they have some privacy. And now that's just not true at all. And so we don't know where that line is, where what we're doing is just fair game for, you know, governments and corporations to track, or if it's something that we kind of have a right to have that privacy. And there's like GDPR in the EU, which is built, you know, trying to grapple with that idea of letting people have privacy and the right to be forgotten and the right for people not to track all of their, all of this online data that they put out there. And that's, you know, I think that's really important because, as you said, it's not just all like criminals, trying to launder money and, you know, and fund terrorism or whatever. Like it's a huge spectrum of kind of privacy versus safety. And it's something that like none of us have figured out yet.
Yeah. So I heard a little notification from your calendars. Do you have to go right now? Is this it? Are we finishing?
I can be a little bit late to the next meeting.
Okay. Well, I don't know if a little bit is enough time for you to show us around the dark web or give us a quick tour.
Yeah, it'll be really quick, but
all right. Just so we can see what it looks like. And this is something that, like, downfalls of the dark web, because I think I remember hearing from my friend who showed me the first time that you can access any website that you normally can access if you're using Tor, right? And is Tor the main one and the only one, or is there others?
There's other, but I think Tor is kind of the main one. So really, you know, to demystify it a little bit, it is just a browser. So the same way that you would download Chrome and use it, or Safari or Firefox, you will download and use Tor. So when you open it, this is the default page, and it uses DuckDuckGo search engine, which, if you're familiar with it, is, you know, a search engine similar to Google, but it doesn't kind of track all of your searches and store them and analyze them. And I wanted to pull up a couple of good examples, but unfortunately, some of them I wasn't able to load, or they're being weird. But this one is probably a scam. This is like a guns and ammo store where presumably you can buy guns and bullets for, you know, this much money. This one, you'll notice, like, I haven't even logged in or anything, and there's listings already. So it could just be a site where somebody's trying to get a person who wants guns to send money and then they won't actually sell them guns, potentially.
Interesting.
This one didn't load, but this is a place where you could buy dumps of credit card information.
Is there a way to figure out if my credit card is on there? Can you just search for yourself, or is
there are some services. So as you can imagine, like big corporations don't want all of their usernames and passwords and accounts to be sold on the dark web. So there are services that kind of like comb through all of this to see what's being sold and listed. And then if you buy that service, you can kind of see whether you're on there or not. But it's typically geared towards businesses rather than individuals trying to figure that out. I don't know if there's a service that offers it for individuals. This is kind of a weird religion, I think. I'm not sure. And then,
so you're just searching on DuckDuckGo. You're just like searching for things, or
That's a good question. Yeah. So typically you actually can't just search for something and find it, kind of by nature of this being anonymous. So typically you have to figure out what the URL is through message boards, forums. There are some sites that are like aggregators. So if you want to find like all the drug markets on the dark web and the URLs for them, you could find it that way. So it's not as easy to find. This is Yellow Brick, which is a market where you can buy drugs, but I don't know what's going on with it right now. So that's a brief overview of the dark web.
Nice. So, and I know you wanted to mention beforehand that there's not like the murder for hire on the dark web. And we have so many misconceptions about all of this, right? Like, can you clear that up a little bit?
Yeah, that one's, I think, a kind of a fun, interesting one, because anybody who's just starting to get into like learning about it, and we'll find some article, and I think everybody thinks that that's one of the big things that's happening. It's like this murder for hire. There are sites out there that claim to offer murder for hire, but as far as I know, hasn't really ever been an actual case of somebody. Basically, what they are scams, because there are legitimately people out there who want to hire someone to murder someone, but there aren't necessarily like legitimate murderers out there for hire. So usually what'll happen is somebody will pay a lot of money to one of these sites and then just not see that money, and the person stays alive. And it's dangerous though, because that does indicate that there's somebody out there who wants somebody murdered, and they might find another way to do it. So it's definitely worth kind of paying attention to that activity, but it's not quite what people think.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it seems like if you don't know what you're doing on Tor or on the dark web, it's a really good way to get burnt or caught fast.
Yeah.
So
and actually kind of a last anecdote on that. There was a market called Hansa market where people could buy drugs. I think it was in like Germany. And law enforcement actually took it over, and instead of shutting it down right away, they operated the market for like 3 months so that they could, find out like the vendors and the users and everything. And nobody really knew, except there were comments on the message board where people were like complimenting the site for having like better customer service. Law enforcement was running a good customer service on the drug site for a while. But
they were too good.
Yeah,
that's how you know your message board or your marketplace has been taken over.
Right,
it's not the same people. If the customer service gets too good,
exactly,
something's up. Yeah. So I just have a few more questions. I know you got to go, and I was wondering, can you tell us who Satoshi is?
Satoshi Nakamoto. For those who don't know, that's the anonymous creator of Bitcoin. And there's been a lot of speculation over the years about who this is, whether it's one person or a group. And, my conspiracy theory is that, probably like the US government created it and put it out there.
What? Wow, that's different.
Yeah,
I haven't heard that one before.
That's very. Yeah, I mean, it's just silly speculation. But if you think about it, first of all, the Tor project was funded by the U.S. government back in the early days. There's a real kind of need, even on the government side, for like anonymity software and stuff like that. And then the other thing is, people have this misconception that it is anonymous and good for using for criminal purposes, when the reality is the exact opposite. I think you can hide your trails using cash way easier than you can with Bitcoin. So like, the smartest thing you could do is to create some digital currency that criminals think is safe, that you can actually track really easily. So.
Oh, yeah, it makes complete sense when you put it that way. So last question for you, Hannah and Priscilla. I'll let you go. I'll let Priscilla answer this one first. Are you a robot?
Am I a robot?
Yes.
I don't know how to answer that question without sounding like something a robot would say. No.
Love it. How about you, Hannah?
I am. Yeah. Everybody who knows me knows that I'm a robot. It's common knowledge, so I won't even try to hide it at this point.
There we go. Well, thank you both for being incredible guests and really educating us on the dark web, on cryptocurrencies, blockchain, and telling some of these stories about some of the fails. I hope to hear more of the stories, and I am actually going to do some more digging now. You've sparked my interest in this, and I really appreciate your time and you coming on here and talking to me.
Thanks for having us. It's been fun.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thank you.
We will see you all later, and have a great day.
You too.
You too.